Hello, MoveOn. Welcome, and thank you for being here tonight to be in community with thousands of us all across this beautiful country to honor the work we all are called to do to make this world a more just place for every single one of us. Now, you haven't watched the film yet, but I will tell you, it is incredibly moving and inspiring. I watched Racially Charged a few weeks ago, and quite honestly, it brought me to tears. But not hopeless tears. It brought me to tears that motivated me to do more, and it affirmed that this work is so crucial. We need so many more of us to take action, to make change, to fight for one another, to ensure our laws and our systems are humane and that they work for every single one of us. After all, we are a community, and the question is what kind and how compassionate will we be? I'm certain after you watch the film, you'll feel the same. You'll feel inspired, you'll feel motivated. You might, and I'd be shocked if you don't, you might even feel angry, and I was. But let that motivate you, let that fuel you to make change for good, to fight for your communities, to fight for one another, and to create the world that we know is possible and that we all believe. At the end of the film viewing, you will be asked to start a petition to your local district attorney. And that is important. It's a great first step to building the pressure that we need to apply on decision makers to make a difference. We'll help you do it. We'll talk more about how to do it after you watch the film, but it's incredibly important. And it's the first step of action that we'd love the thousands of you viewing this here tonight to take. Change starts with you. Change starts with us, and together we are strong, and I am so grateful. So thank you.
Hello, everyone. Let me thank MoveOn and Brave New Films for another excellent piece of work. Racially Charged. Just cut to the chase and talk about the U.S. criminal justice system because that is at the heart of it. Race and class. If you look at the millions of people that are incarcerated today, we know that a very large percentage are incarcerated because they didn't have proper legal defense, although one can raise why they were even charged to begin with, but two, because of the way laws come down inappropriately. So I was interested to see that one of the insurrectionists, one of the individuals that charged the Capitol, that violently intervened, is being charged with a felony but will serve 8 months in prison. I think of the black man in Texas who was formerly incarcerated and made a mistake in voting, who is being charged and potentially faces a sentence of 5 years in prison. That's all you need to do is look at the differences. So a film like this is so critical, and let me just say that the work you do is so critical. I can't get anything done here in Washington without an outside strategy that pushes this institution to move. And let me just say that the timing could not be more perfect right now. Okay, so we're experiencing an uptick in crime. Everybody that's watching this knows that crime cycles. Crime cycles up, crime cycles down. So the cycle up right now is being used to say we don't need police reform. As a matter of fact, the reason why crime is increasing is because we've tied the hands of police and we've demoralized them. So in this period that we're in right now, where we have worked for decades to push for criminal justice reform, and we're finally on our way, we cannot allow an uptick in crime to be used as an excuse to move the needle back. That's why the work that you're doing and the call to action is just critical. The George Floyd Justice and Policing Act was passed out of the House of Representatives in March of this year, and it has been languishing in the Senate. Anything that you can do to voice your support, call the senators, email them, tweet about them, get them to move would just be greatly appreciated. Again, let me just thank Brave New Films. Let me thank MoveOn for the work that you do. We can't get anything done in the halls of Congress without the activism on the outside making it happen. Thank you.
biggest misconception about misdemeanors is that they are minor.
To start hearing more and more stories of voter suppression, that broke my heart.
They're the ones that are using the system.
My grandma was fighting for integration back in her day, and I'm fighting for the same thing now.
The problem is the system is working the way it's supposed to.
We're recording.
All right.
Sometimes I feel like my life ended that day.
My car died on the side of the road. A cop walked over to my car and asked me if I needed help, and I said no.
John Clark was convicted on a misdemeanor gambling charge and was forced to work on a chain gang.
I just remember being pushed, like being cornered into a wall.
I was just starting out life.
And I didn't think I had anything to hide.
Mary Gay was sentenced to 30 days, plus court costs for stealing a hat.
I was arrested that evening.
It was a misdemeanor. That was the beginning of the nightmare that I had to go through.
Henry Nelson was arrested for using abusive language in the presence of a female and was sent off to the coal mines.
He said, "You're going to jail." And I'm like, "What for?"
Misdemeanors have historically been the chump change crimes that we didn't pay attention to.
I've done nothing.
Man, I just got beat up by the police last night. I could have lost my life.
13 million. Well, that's about 80% of all American criminal dockets. 80% of what our criminal courts do is misdemeanors.
Got him in cuffs, look. I ain't doing nothing.
The story of misdemeanors is the story of law enforcement continuing to prioritize African Americans, Mexican immigrants, America's so-called criminal class.
Hey, you act like I really just committed a serious crime.
You did do something illegal. You crossed the crosswalk.
You might see 2 or 3 police standing here waiting for you.
The cops will jump out of the van anytime, anywhere.
That's what I was joking.
The misdemeanor system has not gotten its fair share of blame. Misdemeanors are the invidious first step in the racialization of crime in this country.
Too often, arrests for minor crimes devolve into police violence and death for Black and brown people.
They got me for jaywalking.
Not wearing a seatbelt. My tail light was out.
I was arrested for being home.
Driving with a suspended license.
My license got suspended because I didn't know I had an unsafe parking.
I was shocked, and that was for this big claim that I was in
I want $744 fine because I couldn't pay
And how far back that goes is a really dark story. Reconstruction was an era when 4 million African Americans made it out of bondage and were able to achieve at really high levels, whether it was in business, in education, different ways of prosperity that really threatened white supremacy.
They elected many Black men to positions of power. Of course, that was a sea change from how power had been exercised during slavery, and a lot of white folks just didn't like it. They were nostalgic for the old days of overt white supremacy, and so they subverted Reconstruction.
If you look at misdemeanors and you track them from the Reconstruction era to modern day, you see the fingerprints everywhere of white supremacy and control of Black bodies.
The landowners, they had nearly lost everything. And the only way to get that back is to somehow corral the Black labor force back onto the same plantations that they had once worked.
The most effective way of forcing African Americans back into this condition that would be so similar to slavery was to begin to criminalize Black life itself.
Misdemeanor offenses for incredibly trivial or made-up things, what should have been tiny penalties for non-existent offenses, turn into years of people's lives.
Where were you taken? I was taken out to the camps. Where did you sleep? Slept on some hay. Chain was on me.
I'm being put into handcuffs. I'm being dragged into this cold space. I don't have anything to cover myself. And I'm asked to sit inside of this tiny little room, and I have no idea why I'm there.
Was there any jury that tried you? No, sir. Did the recorder ask you whether you wanted a lawyer? No, sir.
And I thought that I would have time to talk to a court-appointed attorney so we could talk about what happened. And I could ask them to get other, pieces of evidence that would prove that, hey, I'm poor. It wasn't like I was trying to run off with this money.
Did they furnish any copy of the charge against you? No, sir, they did not. Did they give you any opportunity to plead to any accusation? They never gave me anything at all.
When they asked me how I pled no contest. I didn't understand that no contest is the same as guilty, and that I would walk away with a misdemeanor that would affect my ability to get hired.
The justice system after emancipation was weaponized against Black people. It perpetuated slavery by making the mechanisms of enslavement pretty much the same. Family separation, backbreaking labor, people having no rights. You could be sold on the steps of the courthouse that you were convicted in and given to the highest bidder.
A whole separate criminal code that applied to African Americans was established.
Many misdemeanor offenses are best understood as mechanisms of social control. They're not designed to catch dangerous or guilty people, but rather they are tools. We give them to police as additional ways of exercising their authority.
Some of these laws were overtly race-based, and with others then and now, the understanding was that the laws would look race-neutral, but they would be applied and enforced almost exclusively against Black people.
For these governments to sell prisoners into slavery, you first have to arrest lots of people. There's a big problem with that, though. There's just not enough crime for this system to work and for it to be profitable. The state governments of the South had to invent new crimes.
Southern legislatures, which are essentially run by Confederates at that time, are trying to reinscribe a form of slavery through a system of laws called Black Codes.
A whole category of new statutes passed in almost every southern state that attached these enormous penalties to what were in reality very minor thefts. Those were laws, and many others like it, that were only ever enforced against African Americans. And so it became a way to have a basis for arresting huge numbers of Black people.
I don't remember much about writing the check.
John Owen was caught taking 6 ears of corn from a cornfield and was arrested under the Black Codes.
This is $4, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 times 4 is $28. So just this pile right here is how much I went to jail for.
Owen was put in jail for months until he was finally tried for theft.
I have a theft charge. It's theft by check. I had money in the bank, but I didn't know how long it took for checks to process. Like, I know better now. I could have donated plasma, gotten $25.
Under his sentence, Owen was leased into convict labor and sent to the chain gang, where he served 2 years for the corn and a 3rd year for the court costs.
I was in the Hays County Jail for a total of 45 days for $25 worth of food.
Michael Brown, who was the teenager who was killed by police in Ferguson, whose death led to the explosion of the Black Lives Matter movement, he was stopped for jaywalking. He stepped off the sidewalk and was walking in the street, and there was a local criminal ordinance that made it a crime to do so. African Americans are being cited for jaywalking at 3, 5, 10 times the rate of white pedestrians.
The legislatures of the white South make it a crime to walk alongside a railroad. In an era in which there are no paved roads, the easiest way for a poor person to get from one place to another is to walk alongside a railroad. That law didn't say this only applies to black people, but those were laws that were only ever enforced against African Americans.
All of us engage in what would be considered to be minor crimes. And for some people, it's crossing the street at the wrong time. But if you're black or brown, then it becomes categorized as something that's criminal.
So what is I doing?
Didn't use a crosswalk.
All I'm trying to do is go home, man. I'm tired. I just got off of work.
Nandi Kane says he was walking home from work when it happened.
I felt like they were gonna draw a gun out and shoot me in my back.
I'm tired of all this shit, man.
Vagrancy laws were passed that essentially meant any black person who was found on the streets unemployed and couldn't show evidence of work was a criminal, a vagrant.
Trespass laws originate from this idea that African Americans only belong in certain spaces and at certain times. And so they give police officers the ability, under the guise of law, to dictate where an African American person can be, what time they can be there, and how they can operate in certain spaces.
My kids' daycare was inside of one of the buildings to the Skyway, so I figured I'd take a walk, find somewhere to sit down, and wait on them to get there.
I'm going to New Horizons to pick up my kids. I was sitting there for 10 minutes.
Monroe Dolphus was standing in the train yard when he was grabbed by the sheriff's deputy. Monroe stated that he had not committed any crime.
Wait. You're gonna go to jail. I'm not doing anything wrong. Hold on. Can you please? No, come on, brother. I'm not your brother. This is assault.
At this moment, I saw my children's daycare class and their teachers and everything walking past while this was happening. He took the taser and drove it into my leg, and pretty much at that point, lost all control of the leg.
The deputy later claimed that the crime committed by Dolphus was taking a 25-cent tin of fish from the lunch pail of a Southern Railway worker. Unable to provide any evidence to support this, the charge was changed to vagrancy.
And I kept asking them what I was being charged with. They'll create false charges just to make sure that everything is perpetuated.
Judge Longshore found Dolphus guilty of misdemeanor vagrancy and sentenced him to 5 months and 20 days of hard labor in the mines of Tennessee, coal, iron, and railroad.
Going back to the vagrancy laws of the late 19th century, the people who make those laws have in mind another group of people for whom there is an inherent threat to their livelihood, like breaking barbecue ordinances in public parks or sleeping in dormitories that white people don't think you live there.
I have every right to call the police.
It allows law enforcement to regulate whether or not certain behavior for one group of people is deemed criminal and another group of people is just frivolous activity.
Many people remember the Starbucks debacle in Philadelphia. There were 2 African-American men at a Starbucks. The employee had them arrested for loitering, where they're clearly not engaging in that behavior.
What did they get called for? Because there were 2 black guys sitting here meeting me? Yes, I did.
Loitering is a police tool of choice. It's the go-to offense that police often use to impose their authority. In the misdemeanor system, there is no conduct too minor, no act too small that the state cannot render a crime.
Black people charged with a misdemeanor are 75% more likely to be locked up than white people. You have to realize that these laws didn't happen by chance. They were part of a system to continue to oppress Black bodies.
Our misdemeanor system includes all kinds of offenses, and some of them can be quite serious. Domestic violence, DUI, but most of the time, we treat minor, harmless conduct as misdemeanors. Traffic offenses, jaywalking, order maintenance offenses, spitting, driving on a suspended license for failure to pay a fine. And yet, these minor, meaningless misdemeanors can have terrible consequences for individuals. To understand the misdemeanor system, follow the money.
The accused are paying for the judges, the prosecutors, and the public
They made more
defenders.
than $3.5 million off phone
Commissary at the jail, it's a no moneymaker.
They call it the $20 ad.
I'm a family member, transfers money in jail.
Pocketing leftover money from the inmates'
about
food budget.
$2,000 a month in e-cig
They are a
sales.
controversial food vendor with a
Rampant
big
fraud,
state contract.
waste, and
Tonight,
abuse.
Aramark is
The
in
company
spotlight.
that uses inmate workers.
Today's system is estimated at $80 billion. The misdemeanor side of it, it is a way of saddling people with fines and fees that will put money in the pockets of the administrators of that system.
The first time I got a ticket, my insurance had lapsed. So I got the speeding ticket and I got a no insurance ticket at the same time. The next time I got pulled over, I was arrested for driving with a suspended license. I paid the tickets, paid the court costs, paid my fees and fines, but they said for driving with a suspended license, the punishment for that is we're going to suspend your license for 2 years. I would often have to choose between paying my inspection or my registration or paying my light bill or other bills that I had. I had to drive my car to get to work because I had a construction job. If I needed to take material to the job, I couldn't take plywood or 2x4s on a bus.
I felt like there was no way I was gonna be able to take care of the kids on my own while you were out because I didn't know how long you were gonna be in jail.
This officer saw me, a young Hispanic guy, driving a 63 Impala and said, you know what, that guy, he's up to something. I was trying to go to work, trying to pay bills, and he's treating me like a hardened criminal. That misdemeanor charge ended up becoming something that I couldn't get rid of.
They are being treated as revenue sources, charged daily fees for being in jail, supervision fees, tether fees, drug testing fees, database fees to fund bail bondsmen, private probation companies, electronic monitoring companies, drug testing companies. It is disturbingly similar to the way that we saw African Americans being exploited in the post-war South.
I'm DeMario Davis, linebacker for the New Orleans Saints. I was born and raised in Mississippi, pretty much raised by a single mom. Entering into my second year of college, me and a teammate were caught shoplifting groceries from Walmart. It kind of felt a lot more like a drug bust than us having stole some groceries. The bail was set at $10,000 and I didn't have $10,000. The football coaches bailed us out. A misdemeanor, you're supposed to be able to be in front of the judge within 90 days, but this is not happening. This is not happening in our country. We have people who are spending 7, 8 months in jail who have not even been sentenced.
Cop arrested me and I was charged with the misdemeanor.
The term chain gang was coined on account of the shackle worn by convict laborers.
They said, okay, listen, we're gonna let you go home now. But Scram's gonna come and put a monitor on you.
They were taken to an anvil, where a rivet was pounded into the ankle cuffs to keep them closed. Then the cuffs were chained together.
The initial fee to get on the Scram was $250. That's just to have it put on. Then after that, they charged me $220 a month for the actual monitor.
Many of the convicts suffered from shackle sores, ulcers where the iron ground against their skin. Gangrene and other infections were also common.
Right after they put it on me, you start causing these really severe sores and rashes. And their attitude pretty much is, it's court ordered, it's by a judge, and you'll wear it, or you can go back to jail.
The emaciated convict laborers worked their entire days barefoot, but the shackles were always on their ankles. They mined in them, slept in them, and those who died of disease or beatings were buried in them.
What they're doing is unjust. What they're doing is profiteering, because you're paying them. You're their slave with their shackle on your foot.
I remember this hopeless feeling just overcome me. I couldn't take care of my family.
The biggest misconception about misdemeanors is that they are minor. The full consequences of getting a misdemeanor can be astronomical.
It hurt me for 10 years, and it completely disrupted my life. And I have been trying to figure out how to get my life back on track. This will be a part of my story for the rest of my life.
When people are booked into jails for a week or a year or even a day, you just cannot avoid the trauma that's inflicted upon you.
The moment you hit the jail, you don't come out of that unchanged or untouched. You witness trauma, you witness violence, and it changes you. It changes your community.
I tried to get a job at Amazon where my roommate worked. I called to Walmart and I called to several other retail stores. I got turned away because I had a misdemeanor charge for theft.
Not enough people talk about what it means to have a misdemeanor on your record. It can determine the kind of job that you get, to the kind of housing that you can qualify for, to the kind of schools that you can go to. A lot of people are harmed for life because of the smallest infractions.
They're being rendered homeless. They're going without food, without medication. Their children are suffering.
Due to misdemeanors, I lost my housing. Shortly after that, I lost my vehicle, which led to me losing my job. And it was just one thing after another, like kicks to the face. I had full custody of my children. They had to get to school. We had to sleep in the car, waking up at like 4 in the morning, getting to a laundromat to make sure that they have clean school uniforms.
I had worked so hard and all of that was ruined by one charge. One misdemeanor ruined my ability to get even just basic work.
They can't get a job if they have to check a box that says they've been convicted of a crime. They can't even rent housing because they got poor credit when they received a ridiculous $500 speeding violation. So this system was designed both to extract from people, but also to marginalize their presence in society.
It's finna be a mass grave site.
This is the dormitory. The stupid crowd, these are the beds. They right beside each other, and this is the space.
Everybody just dying and getting sick and shit, like this shit serious as fuck. Bro, you alright? You want me to go get the police?
No.
What have you done this bitch?
You ain't gonna do nothing about it.
This motherfucker literally in this bitch dying, bro. I don't know what to do.
One of the
worst places to be during this pandemic is locked up in jail.
The judge never said, I'm sending you to prison to die.
The same horror story is emerging of the unchecked spread of infection and inmates essentially being left to die.
Now, jaywalking or theft of a small amount or any sort of vagrancy type of behavior can lead to your incarceration and eventual contracting of the virus and death.
I've been in jail for 2.5 months for petty theft, a nonviolent crime that carries a misdemeanor charge for the price value of less than $100. There's been 3 deaths, 2 being inmates, 1 being a guard. As far as like people who are working for the facility, they're like intertwined. They could easily be catching it. That's how one of the guards caught it. My life is in danger.
These human beings aren't valued enough for us to apply the same kinds of safety measures there that we are in other sectors of society. If it wasn't already bad enough that you are booked into jail because you didn't have the money to pay the ticket and your license is suspended, that is now life-threatening to you.
Sheriff's Office is now releasing non-violent inmates as a next step in mitigating the spread of COVID-19.
Hundreds of inmates have been released from Shelby County's jail in an effort to put fewer people at risk for coronavirus.
600 inmates
A total of 38 inmates are ordered to
They
release.
were inmates. Now they're freed people.
Because of COVID-19, thousands of misdemeanor defendants are rightly being released. It's clear that these individuals should have never been incarcerated in the first place. We can tell by the fact that after these releases, we haven't seen any sort of crime wave. There's a different type of crime wave that should concern us, though, and that's the crime of violence against Black people post-Civil War.
State violence has historically been used to intimidate people of color, especially Black people. We see this all throughout history.
Misdemeanors, they have almost nothing to do with public safety. What misdemeanors do is give police an extraordinary amount of discretion with any minor offense premised on the idea that the Black man is a threat.
Misdemeanors are a very specific mechanism that legalize violence toward Black people and keep them in a very particular place, not just as individuals, but as an entire community of people.
When we look at so many cases in history, often what started as an investigation or a claim of a petty misdemeanor offense led to police officer-supported and sanctioned racial terrorism.
All too often, we see police exercising that terrible authority of violence against people who have only been suspected of the most minor of crime.
The problem isn't bad apple cops. The problem is the system is working the way it's supposed to.
Police shot this boy outside my apartment. They killed him.
I can't breathe. I can't breathe. Hey, bro. You move, I swear to God. Hey, boss. Hey, boss. I just can't breathe. I'm so sorry. I have no gun.
Gray appeared to be unable to walk and was screaming as he was carried, feet dragging on the ground, to a police van.
I know, you just on your job. Mama, they gonna kill me, man, out here. I can't breathe. Please, the name of it. I can't breathe out here. Please.
My life could have so easily been taken in that skyway. George Floyd goes to show further that the most minor of offenses, even no offense at all, could result in death.
The very purpose of racial terrorism is control, is social control.
What we have seen in the killings of those accused was that misdemeanors became the gateway for police violence and murder.
We are seeing decriminalization. We are seeing citations instead of arrests. We are seeing people let out of jail. We are seeing pushback against fines and fees. But at the same time, there is so much more work that needs to be done.
Who defined what a misdemeanor is? The whole thing was built on exploitation, on racial violence, on building up industrial capitalism.
We should not be locking up people who speed, who are too poor to pay a fine or a fee, who loiter or trespass or jaywalk. They're not dangerous, they're not scary.
There's never been a good reason to lock up anybody for petty offenses. Like slavery back in the day, the law itself is doing the work of oppression. The criminal law is providing the authority to arrest Black people, to punish Black people, to kill Black people. And ultimately, the real crime is that we're Black.
When officers use their discretion and still choose to arrest low-level offenders instead of citing and releasing them, they are choosing to lock a human into a cage we wouldn't even put our dogs in.
We got 123 people out of the Hayes County Jail yesterday.
It eliminated the penalty for being caught driving with a suspended license from another 2-year suspension to a 90-day suspension.
Don't allow the outside world to corrupt you. Don't allow the outside world to tell you who you are.
I wanted to be a voice for those who are not able to be a voice for themselves.
Hi everyone, my name is Arvin Oleg and I'm a campaign manager here at MoveOn, where I work on racial justice issues. I first want to thank everyone who's taken the time to watch Racially Charged with us. I know that it's not an easy documentary. I know that it's infuriating, I know it's challenging, I know that it's upsetting, but it's such a critical film, especially at a time like this. The stories we heard are only a tiny fraction of the millions of lives that our criminal legal system has harmed and continues to harm every single day. It's so important that we hear these stories and learn this history so that we can continue the work of dismantling the racist systems that continue to create such unjust outcomes. We're now going to hear from Robert Greenwald, who's the president and founder of Brave New Films, and he also directed Racially Charged. And he'll talk a little bit about what went into the creation of the film and how it's been received since its release in April. After Robert, we're going to hear a message from Faylita Hicks, whose story is featured in the documentary. I'll be back after that to close out the program and to let you know of a few ways that you can plug in your community and fight back against our racist criminal legal system. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll talk to you soon.
Hello, I'm Robert Greenwald, founder of Brave New Films and the director of Racially Charged. Brave New Films and MoveOn have a long and productive history together. In fact, it was Eli from MoveOn who suggested that we start and have house parties without Fox many years ago. And over the years, as Brave New Films has evolved and as MoveOn has evolved, we've continued to find ways to work together and to use film, video, social media to activate, to motivate, to tell stories that get people to do things. Racially Charged began after I'd read the brilliant book by Professor Alexandra Natapov, Punishment Without Crime, that motivated the beginning of what turned out to be 2 years of research and work about the fact, now this is a real fact, that 12 to 13 million people every year are locked up or put into the carceration system for misdemeanors, things that people who are white are almost never punished for. It's systemic racism at its worst. It's systemic racism that spreads, and that in fact, as we have seen, misdemeanors have become a gateway to police murder all too often. Misdemeanors and the racist elements have led to the destruction of lives in many forms. Homes, schooling, family, torn apart because of the use and the abuse of these oppressive laws. And in the film, as you'll see, as in the book, this goes back to the Reconstruction era. No crime outbreak, no crime wave. This is about taking control of one group of people. The film is available for free. Thank you to all of the funders of Brave New Films. And it's available in many different formats. The full film can be screened. We have study guides. We have reflection guides for screening in the faith community. We have short clips on Twitter and Facebook and YouTube and Instagram and TikTok. But most importantly, it's up to each and every one of us to tell the story, to reach out, and to make sure that this horrific abuse of the carceration system by utilizing misdemeanors as a tool is not allowed to continue. Thank each and every one of you for the work you do, for the engagement, and for fighting for our country and fighting for the values and fighting to dismantle the elements of this system that must be taken apart.
Hi, my name is Faylita Hicks, and I am the poet in residence for Civil Rights Corps. Since the release of Racially Charged, America's Misdemeanor Problem, I have been keeping an eye out to see what the conversation is when it comes to misdemeanors and how we can start changing our narrative around mass incarceration by understanding misdemeanors' attachment to slavery. The conversation is happening, but for me, just not enough. Personally, of course, I wish that everyone could see this documentary and understand the deep impact of it, but that's just not the case. What we are seeing at the national level is pretty encouraging. So one big thing that I've been very excited about is the Abolition Amendment. The Abolition Amendment was introduced by Senator Jeff Merkley and Congresswoman Nakia Williams. That piece of legislation is meant to change the exception rule in the 13th Amendment. Many people have heard of the documentary, The 13th. The 13th Amendment still allows for slavery in the U.S. today. And people who go to prison and who end up becoming enslaved by the system are people who may or may not have had misdemeanors first. We know through data and through history that misdemeanors are used and compounded together to then become felonies or more serious charges that result in long-term incarceration. And this is going to be something that is extremely monumental if it passes. It will end slavery officially in the U.S., which is something that we all desperately want and desperately need. The celebration of Juneteenth is representative of that. I'm ready for slavery to end in the U.S., and I know that there are so many more people who are ready for it to end, and it's just a conversation that needs to keep happening. Something else I'm pretty excited about is definitely the new piece that was introduced by Congresswomen Cori Bush and Ayanna Pressley, the People's Response Act. The People's Response Act it's a legislative reimagining of the future, which is very exciting for me as a poet. I'm in a place where I don't want to just think about all the things that have gone wrong. I want to say, okay, now what is the literal future going to look like? What can I change today, right now, that will change the future and change the outcomes for people in my community? Not just, the big conglomerate change, but the everyday lives of people in my community. And that's what the People Response does. It looks at it and says, what's the infrastructure that we need in order to protect people's lives? What would happen if instead of calling the police when someone is having a mental health issue, what would happen if we called someone who knows how to deal with mental health issues instead? What happens if we, instead of, trying to police people for simple offenses, and I don't even like calling crossing the street and not using the sidewalk an offense, but what would happen if instead of, calling the police for that, we, just talk to each other as community members and relied on the resources that are provided to us by the government, if they so choose to put the funding in the community programs instead of directly into police programs, right? Let's actually look at the root of the problem, which is community members need more support. And so that excites me. That is something that really encourages me and helps me to think about what joy will be found once we know that everyone has adequate access to healthcare, once we know that everyone has access to a home, once we know that people who are re-entering after having been incarcerated are being given the opportunity to work for themselves and put money together and get the support that they need. What happens when we stop focusing on trying to punish what we call bad, and we start working on trying to heal, and we start providing the resources to the people who can do the healing, right? So both of those things excite me a lot. As far as what I'm doing as a writer, I am trying to figure out how to translate policy and make it easier for everyday folks to understand how policies like, the People's Act or Abolition Amendment might help us at the local level, right? We don't just end up having a bad day. That bad day is preceded by a lot of other factors in the community, and that's something that needs to be addressed. I am hoping that misdemeanors as a gateway into enslavement will be a conversation that continues to happen. I am hoping that more folks will understand that misdemeanors change lives. We see in the video people who lost their lives to misdemeanors. One person who's not mentioned is Corinne Gaines. Corinne Gaines was being served a failure to appear warrant for a misdemeanor on the day that she died. It blows my mind that someone will lose their life over a piece of paper for a misdemeanor. And the misdemeanor was something simple. It was a cardboard sign on her license plate that says, "You will not stop this pursuit of happiness." That's my message. You will not stop this pursuit of happiness. And so that's my thoughts. And I hope that you enjoy the film. If you've already seen it, I hope that you enjoyed the film. And please share this message, this extremely important message. Misdemeanors are completely upending and, in some cases, ending lives, which means we need to change the way we look at misdemeanors overall. Thank you.
Thank you to Robert and Felita for their powerful and insightful messages, and I hope that they've inspired you to channel your emotions into action. We're encouraging viewers of Racially Charged to start petitions to their local county and district attorneys at moveon.org/raciallycharged. Whether it's about misdemeanor policy or something else relevant to your community, starting a petition and spreading it across your network can be the first step to making lasting positive change. For those folks who want a template petition to start out with, we have a pre-filled one calling for the end of cash bail in your local community, so that people who can't afford to pay bail aren't detained in jail just because they're poor. We can also help in building support for your petitions in your respective communities. So if you're interested in that, and for more details on this campaign, again, you can head on over to moveon.org/raciallycharged. You can also learn more about this film and sign up to host a watch party in your community at misdemeanorfilm.org. This website has tons of amazing resources, just like Robert mentioned, such as discussion guides and relevant news updates. And finally, MoveOn is one of the organizations that has sponsored the People's Response Act, which Felita had mentioned. This is a proposed bill sponsored by Representatives Cori Bush and Ayanna Pressley to reimagine public safety in such major ways. You can call your representative and urge them to support the People's Response Act and stay on the lookout for more ways to get involved in People's Response Act campaigning and advocacy through MoveOn and through our partners in the coming weeks. Finally, thank you to Representative Bass. Thank you to Rahna and Robert and Felita for giving their messages. And thank you to everyone who's tuned in to this film screening. We are so looking forward to continuing this critical work with MoveOn members from across the countries in the weeks and months to come. Have a good night. Thank you.